Hello, Bobby, aka, Ashby Lipsiv here, and in this video, I want, to talk about, why, National Socialism is considered a far-right, political philosophy despite having a far-left sounding, name. Now, to truly understand why National Socialism is considered far-right, you have to know what far-left and far-right really mean, and where their philosophical bases are. So, I will attempt to briefly go over those, and I will, of course, as always, provide links, in the description. Now, the National Socialist, German Workers' Party was initially just called the German Workers' Party. The Socialist, part was added later in the first Chancellor's, administration. Yeah, like, that's another thing that a lot of people don't know about the Nazis. Hitler was not the first Chancellor of the Nazi Party. The first Chancellor, was a man named Anton Drexler. That was who founded the Freikorps, which were an anti-communist, anti-Semitic militia in Germany that later became the National Socialist Party. But originally they were called the Freikorps. And of course, if you're noticing a parallel between that name and the American far right, Freemen, that in all likelihood is no coincidence, as the right, historically have not been very inventive when it comes to names, and this is not surprising considering that most rightists are neo-feudalist and essentialist, whereas most leftists are social revolutionaries, social progressionists. Of course, there are always exceptions, but in general, that is the trend. And existentialists, right? Which is funny because a lot of early existentialists were conservative, but over time the conservative right went more towards essentialism, and the left, the revolutionary and liberal left, went more towards existentialism. Again, there are always exceptions, especially when it comes to the establishment left, which, in my personal opinion, shouldn't really be called left at all. They're basically just conservatives light. But, you know. Yeah, so, also, National Socialists, tend, tended to be extremely ethnocentric, whereas actual socialists and anarchists reject ethnocentrism on principle as a bourgeois, neo-feudalist, reinforcing prejudice. And that's another thing that makes National Socialism very much the opposite of traditional internationalist socialism. The Nazis had a very favorable view of imperialism, which sort of goes hand in hand with the ethnocentrism. As well as their general social Darwinist line, which, once again, is more of a conservative thing than an actually socialist thing. And I'm not going to rehash, like old ground over the differences between evolution and social Darwinism, because I've ranted about those differences enough in the past, like when I was going through my new atheist phase, so yeah, like, I'm not gonna go over that shit again. Also, the Nazis had a far more favorable view of European traditionalism than traditional socialists have had. And in fact, the Nazis tended to dismiss classical socialists as Jewish conspirators and subverters of natural, healthy, competitive, capitalist culture. And whilst the Nazis reject the free market. They very much accepted the general premise of capitalism that a boss and top-down management is required for labor to really be done effectively. Like the Nazis, even though the majority of them were Catholics, and and smaller amount were and a smaller amount were pagans and Protestants and animists, and an even smaller amount were atheists and agnostics. In fact, atheists and agnostics were generally purged as as potential enemies of state and contributors to cultural Bolshevism, which I've talked about before, how cultural Marxism is basically Nazi propaganda appropriated by conservatives and neoliberals in order to cover up the shitty elements of their own political philosophies. Also, National Socialist were big believers that the cruelest and the meanest and the strongest should be the victors, not necessarily the most moral. And you can't really get much more capitalist than that, after all, can you? In fact, one of Hitler's most famous political speeches was when he said, "The victor shall never be asked if he told the truth." And he also said, "Make the lie big, keep repeating it, and eventually the people will believe it." And the name of his party is just another perfect example of the big lie of the Nazis. I mean, their own name their own party name was a big lie. But of course, the rightists will not tell you this because they do not want to have to answer for their role in spreading in their churches and their communities and their families the very ethnocentric bile that led to the Nazis in the first place. They don't want to have to cop to that. And so they'll reinforce the big lie, ironically whilst claiming to be champions of truth. So yeah, this has been Bobby, aka Aspie Libsoch, Liberty, Equality, Fraternity, goodbye.